Members, we're now in open session, and as we turn to our deliberation of the Children's Services Cooperation Bill, I remind you this session is being recorded by Hansard. So for the record, we've heard from stakeholders who are generally in principle supportive of the bill, but also they have issues and concerns. We've also heard from the Department about their concerns and how they believe they can be addressed. The bill's sponsor has given us his response to issues that have been raised and also suggested amendments put forward during the course of our evidence gathering. And finally, we have the benefit of the input from Daniel Greenberg. The purpose of today's session is not to formally consider and agree each clause, but to go through the clauses, weighing up evidence received and considering if we wish to explore amendments. There are three ways we could bring forward amendments. One is agreed amendments with the Department, where they would be addressing our concerns. You'll recall the Department outlined a number of amendments which officials consider could improve the bill. Second is by way of agreed amendments from the bill's sponsor. And thirdly, our own amendments. Now, there may be some other policy issues which don't need to be included on the face of the bill, but which we may wish to consider making recommendations on in our report. For example, streamlining the various reports required in respect of children. I suggest we leave those issues until a later date and concentrate on the bill itself today, if you are content. Thank you. Okay, so we proceed with the following references. Members, page 16 in your pack is the clerk's paper. A paper setting out issues suggesting amendments begins at page 18. A more detailed issues paper, which includes the bill's sponsor's response, is at page 26. The Department's paper setting out a potential revised structure for the bill is at page 67. Daniel Greenberg's technical note at page 72. Advice from the Examiner of Statutory Rules at 77. And finally, a copy of the bill and the EFM begins at page 79 of your main pack. So, we start with Clause 1, the general duty. It sets out 6 high-level outputs or outcomes for children and young people, and it places a duty on Northern Ireland departments to cooperate to further those outcomes. Now, the high-level outcomes are those listed in the current children's strategy, and that runs out next year. The clause will also allow OFMDFM to amend outcomes by means of subordinate legislation. We heard support for the general duty from a range of stakeholders. Many agree with specifying the 6 high-level outcomes. However, the Children's Law Centre considered the bill should not fetter or predetermine the development of the next children's strategy, and they suggested an amendment to link the high-level outcomes specified in the children's strategy, and they used the 2 words currently operative. So could we take that first, members? Rather than spell out the current 6 high-level outcomes, we suggest an amendment which says that it is aligned to what is currently operative. It seems to me that gives a flexibility. It covers the current 6 high-level outcomes. If that were to become 5, become 7, one of the 6 were to change, there would be no need for any further legislation.
Seems to be,
Yeah.
It seems to be a good enough suggestion, because I know there was discussion about the fact that those outcomes are vague as well and hard to measure.
Yeah.
Enjoying learning.
Yeah.
How do you measure the outcomes of that? So it might be better to just link them to the strategy.
Okay. I'm not hearing any objection. David, you're reasonably? Yeah, okay. The other recommendation, again, I think Children's Law Centre came up with this. It was a recommendation that we amend to make a specific reference to the obligations under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Which would, I suppose, tie us into international best practice.
To argue against it, I guess, it's...
Okay, also saying to further respect for delivery of children's rights, there should be a duty to cooperate at the earliest opportunity. So I think at the earliest opportunity is the new proposed amendment. I'll let that one float, members, but just sorry to go back to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Should we seek urgent clarification of where the department is with regard to that proposition, to see if we're in tune, or whether there's any reason that they have for objecting?
I think that'd be sensible, Chair. I mean, I have to be honest, I'd probably be surprised they were already doing that. There's no reason, obviously, not to put it in legislation, but I think it would be interesting just to, to hear what the department are actually doing,
Mm-hmm. And what are the implications of putting it on the face of the bill? Okay. Okay, members of the Department of Education advised it's uncertain that the bill will actually bring about greater cooperation and collaboration beyond what is already taking place. And the Health Minister also questioned if it's actually necessary to introduce a statutory duty, or if that will simply add a further layer of bureaucracy. OFMDFM have a view on this. They think the clause could be amended to place a duty on the executive to ensure departments, agencies and relevant partners cooperate in the delivery of outcomes which are in the best interests of children and young people as set out in the children's strategy. So that would change the emphasis and put the duty on the executive. A new clause could also be inserted which would require the executive to bring forward a strategy for children and young people. And this would allow flexibility should the outcomes need to be changed over time. We were assured, you'll remember, that the strategy and outcomes would be developed in cooperation and consultation with key stakeholders, including children and young people. So the first thought there is whether this becomes a duty on the executive members. Beyond that, the bill's sponsor indicated he'd be concerned if the bill was to link solely to the children's strategy. He felt an amendment to pin the bill to that strategy alone would mean instances where departments have failed to cooperate in the best interests of children and young people in respect of other strategies, like early years, would therefore not be covered by the legislation. And I think there is some merit and weight in the argument that this is a bill which is not simply about the children's strategy.
What way would that sit with the outcomes and the Children's Law Centre's suggestion to specify the children's strategy instead of naming them?
Depends, I suppose, Megan, the extent to which the new strategy coming next year embraces something like early years strategy. If it becomes fully embracive, which it might, well, there would be an argument that it really needs to be if this bill has become law. So there's a bit of a chicken and egg there. As currently constituted, I kind of get the sponsor's point, but the current dispensation doesn't necessarily continue. In fact, this bill may force a rethink. So one to take away, members, I think, at this stage.
You would have a conflict perhaps if it wasn't, whatever the outcomes are determined, because clearly departments will have their programme for government commitments, for example, which would be the starting point for anything. So if outcomes change, hopefully for the better, and if they're not included in the bill by default, then you'd be in a bit of a pickle, wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. Chicken and egg, what you want is a bill which maximises the obligation of cooperation.
But again, it's one where we might want to seek further assurance from the department as to their intentions.
We complicated in my mind on that one is that if you don't, it's not in the programme for government commitment for a department to do something, then how do we get a bill to cooperate? Who defines then what they're going to cooperate on, if you know what I mean?
Right, so you're okay. You're a minister. You have programme for government commitments. That's your Bible.
And that's
And now you're being told you've another statutory duty to cooperate.
Which in itself is fine, that's important, that's what the bill is designed to do.
Yeah.
But someone might have an idea, the sponsor of the bill or somebody else, for example, may say, well, you have a duty to cooperate to deliver A. The department's going to say, yeah, but A doesn't fit within the programme of government commitments, which I'm bound by. Just trying to worry out how do we avoid that clash.
I suppose ultimately it requires a revisit to the programme for government.
Chair, it may be helpful to just recall that the duty to cooperate, as far as I understand it, was aimed at cooperation in order to achieve these outcomes for children, rather than to deliver cooperation to deliver set policies that would be named. I think it's more about these high-level outcomes that would be listed in the children's strategy, so that might address some of the concern around that, perhaps. But it may be something you want to pick up with the department, just to get some further information.
Yeah. See, because you are getting some conflicting evidence from people saying, well, if you specify them, that's important. Others are saying, don't specify them, link them to a strategy.
Yeah. There's still a tension there, as there's a tension between strategies which are for vulnerable children and this bill which is for all children. Okay. Just I suppose to note, members, NOGA, the Local Government Association, raised a fairly technical issue, requesting this consistency applied to the term outcomes throughout the bill. And just finally, in this clause at 1.4, it allows OFMDFM to modify the specified outcomes at clause 1.3 by subordinate legislation, which will be subject to draft affirmative procedure in the Assembly. Now, you'll see in the examiner's comments, which is paragraph 3 of page 77 of the pack, this is a fairly high degree of Assembly control. He is pointing out that it is for the committee to consider if the power to modify the outcomes by subordinate legislation should be included, as it goes to the very heart of the bill. The examiner is suggesting an amendment to the next clause, and we can consider that in a moment. Any other comments for today's session on Clause 1, members?
I suppose, Chair, just in response to OFMDFM view that the duty should be on the executive rather than departments, just initial reaction seems a bit wide-ranging. Not sure how the executive is held to account in comparison to the department, so I'd be slightly wary of that approach. But I can come back on that.
Okay. I'll note that. So, members, before we move on to Clause 2, I'm really not, just want clarity whether we are simply going back to the department at this stage asking for those points of clarification, or whether anybody around the table is settled in terms of I want one or more amendments on Clause 1.
I don't think so for me. Happy.
Clarification.
Clarification. Okay, thank you. So Clause 2, members, is the cooperation report. It requires OFMDFM to publish a report at least every 3 years on how departments have discharged their functions and cooperated to further the achievement of the specified outcomes. Departments will be required to cooperate with OFMDFM in preparing the report. Now, the principle of a cooperation report was welcomed by many of the people who responded to our call for evidence, but a number of respondents considered the reporting should be at annual intervals rather than every 3 years. Some proposed an annual report with a more comprehensive review every third year. During oral evidence sessions, a number of members have voiced concern about the risk of increased bureaucracy with this reporting regime. The Department of Education has also noted that being required to report to OFMDFM may place a greater administrative burden on departments. As for the Department of OFMDFM, they noted the focus of the report appears to be on cooperation rather than on the achievement of policy objectives and improved outcomes for children and young people. They also state that additional reporting duties are unwelcome.
Sure they are.
Especially if there's a potential for duplication with existing reporting arrangements. So the Department is proposing an amendment requiring the Executive to report regularly to the Assembly, demonstrating how the strategy and the plan are being delivered to achieve and improve the best interests of children and young people. This report would also consider how effectively the duty to cooperate is working. OFMDFM did not propose an annual report, but acknowledged in their oral evidence that there may be a compromise, which would be, funnily enough, every 2 years. I just pause there, members. I suppose one of the key points is you can cooperate from morning to night and not achieve anything. So that point again was the focus of the report appears to be on cooperation rather than on the achievement of policy objectives and improved outcomes. Is this a fair point?
Well, it's hard to know, maybe 1 year, 2 years, 3 years report, and possibly get a more comprehensive report if you left it for 2 or 3 years, but at the same time, things could, if the burden, well, as they put it, the burden, I just consider it their job, so it's not really a burden, but if they have that pressure, they're more likely to try and meet the outcomes. Sure.
Chair, I suppose it's a fair point. I don't think it means that you remove reporting on cooperation, but rather maybe we try to find a form of words that requires that the reporting on cooperation include how that cooperation contributed to achievement of the objectives and the outcomes as well.
I think you're right, Chris. I mean, to me, it's the same sort of thing as the difference between promoting a cause and advancing a cause. You can go out and promote a cause all day and not actually achieve anything. But if you advance a cause, if that's your objective, then that's measurable in terms of, is the cause better off? Now, it sounds to me that's something, yes, I think that the department's working on in terms of an amendment. Would that be understanding? Yeah, I think they are. So,
I suppose
so it's
what I wasn't clear on, though, is how this will differ from a private member's motion, which anybody could bring at any time, asking the department to update us on what they're doing to further the needs of children and young people. I'm just not really sure on how effective this will actually be. I think it's anybody within the Assembly can effectively call the Minister to dispatch box at any time. So how does this differ from that?
Yeah, I think it's all very nice to be reading a report that says we have cooperated by having 27 meetings on the following dates with these various officials and blah 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 blah. But what you really want to know is literacy and numeracy levels amongst young people have improved by X, poverty is down by Y, and
I'm all for focusing minds, and I think it's good, I think it's right, we should do that, but I suppose it this is probably more on a general point rather than to the specific clause, but all of the evidence that we took, there didn't really seem to be anybody who was cheerleading for this legislation. They accepted the fact that there needed to be more done. There needed to be,
it wasn't my impression.
I asked pretty much the same question to everybody around whether what was being suggested and proposed as legislation could be dealt with by other means, and very few people really had seemed to consider it. And a bill, ask somebody, do they want a bill that will potentially improve the quality of lives and opportunities of young people? Of course, everybody's going to say yes. But that doesn't mean it's a good bill, and that's where I probably need a little bit more time to actually just try and get my own head around if legislation is, if it's decided that legislation is the best way to deal with it, then let's do it. Let's just go for it and make sure it's as good a piece of legislation as it can be. But I'm still remaining to be convinced on that.
Right. Well, I'd accept your views. My take would be different. Actually, I felt that a lot of the witnesses said we were going in the right direction and this could kick it on. significantly. Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I had the impression that most of the people who gave evidence were keen to be legislation. I'm not so sure that everybody quite understands how it might have the best impact. Two separate things, I suppose. So I suppose what we're doing now is working our way through the clauses and the various arguments. And ultimately, when we get to the end of that process, you'll have an idea, well, you can make your mind up, look, where is it?
Yep.
You know what I mean? But
Okay.
It's cracked on, yep.
Okay, the next issue within this this clause was the lack of sanctions, and we heard from Stephen Eigen, who basically felt that a judicial review was the ultimate sanction. Against that, you could say an election is the ultimate sanction at the Assembly, but do we want to dwell on this, members?
No, I don't think anybody came forward with, despite identifying lack of sanction, no one identified a possible sanction, so it's hard to remedy that.
Yeah, okay. So I mentioned the examiner and a potential amendment. It's specifically related to making an amendment to clause 2.1d with regard to the better achievement of objectives with or without modification under clause 1.4. Now, the proposal is this could link the modification of the specified outcomes by subordinate legislation with a recommendation for modification in a cooperation report. And I take you to paragraph 4 on page 77, just for reference on that. So basically what he's saying is, one way of doing it is by subordinate legislation, but the other alternative is to say, well, you're putting in place all these reporting mechanisms, and those mechanisms could be the way where you focus minds on achieving your specified outcomes.
I was going to ask her, I mean, what would be the trigger for bringing forward subordinate legislation? Is it the progress reports? Is it, because as I read that, there, people are essentially obligating an annual reporting mechanism, 3-year full review of the progress. In other words, that's really when you do an overview of it. What would trigger then subordinate legislation?
I think on the one hand, OFMDFM might say, right, we want to change things, so we're bringing forward subordinate legislation. On the other hand, the report, whether it's annual, every 2 years, every 3 years, comes for debate at the Assembly. We look at it and we say, actually, this isn't working as well as we want. So we use that report, then becomes a mechanism for saying we are now going to vote to change the high level.
Chair, it's maybe just worth remembering that this may be a moot point if the committee is content that the 6 high-level outcomes that are sitting in the bill today are set, and I mean they've been taken from the current children's strategy actually. But if you move to a case where the bill signposts you to the children's strategy and uses this bill to bind the executive to pay heed to and work towards those objectives, but the objectives are actually just, the text of them is in the children's strategy, then changing them as they're changed through the children's strategy being changed. So this would become a moot point in terms of amending this if the committee accepts FMDFM's proposal for amendments.
You wouldn't need subordinate legislation?
You won't need the subordinate legislation, no, because it'll be in the children's strategy.
Yeah, that's what I thought initially, so yeah.
Okay, so we'll return to that if we need to.
What's the value of, that's, linking it to the strategy which may change?
Okay, so I'm not sensing any amendments on clause 2 at this stage.
Just Chair, I'm inclined to support annual reporting, and if there's a way just to, well, it looks like maybe OFMDFM are going to bring forward a form of words to tighten up reporting on cooperation with a link to achieving specific outcomes, so I think that would be helpful as well. I'm still a bit, they also propose requiring the executive to report. Does the bill require a particular department to report at this stage? It's OFMDFM. Yeah.
OFMDFM.
And they will retain, there's a bit of a vagary here in that responsibility for children and young people as far as I'm aware, is shifting from OFMDFM to education. But will OFMDFM retain responsibility for the children and young persons strategy, or will that go to education as well? Which are maybe things we need to seek some clarification from OFMDFM.
Well, as far as I'm aware, Chris, the implementation group on Stormont House hasn't drilled down or hasn't had a paper at that depth of allocation. We've got the 9 departments. We know the names. We've got some high level allocation. Yeah.
Chair, once again, it's worth just keeping in mind that this is why the committee won't be able to understand fully the detail and the implications till it sees the text of the amendments, because people sometimes refer to the executive when they mean the departments individually and collectively having to do something. So the way the amendment is worded might address some of your concerns there. It could well be that the different departments might contribute their bit of the report in respect of any policy areas for which they have responsibility.
Yeah, no, it's helpful. Just forgive my cynicism around who would actually do the reporting if it's left to the executive rather than a department to do the reporting. Yeah, I suppose we have to see the wording of the amendment, maybe seek some clarification around that. Maybe that's something to check with the proposer of the bill as well, in terms of their views on who exactly should be doing the reporting as well.
Okay,
I mean, the idea that the Assembly is awash with ministers coming to give detailed annual reports on performance against agreed outcomes is a nonsense, to be honest. So I don't think I think it can only be a good thing if we have someone coming to report on a detailed report on an annual basis.
Alex, did you want to?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a wider argument there around accountability, and as you say, or somebody said earlier on, or maybe the final recourse is a JR, or it was an election, as you say yourself, and there are deficits quite clearly. I mean, the report published yesterday in the Assembly and debated on this, it clearly shows there are deficits around accountability. I still think there's a lot more can be done within the institutions as they are, if people by themselves, including themselves, just as members through all of the committees, because we can do a lot more. We can be a lot more robust in our scrutiny, in my opinion, and I include myself in that in the first instance. So it's not an accusation to anybody. I'm just saying I think we can all do a lot more in terms of scrutiny and accountability. It is a wee bit of a conundrum, because I actually took it that putting it to the executive is actually an advancement. I thought that was improvement, because it's putting it at the door of the executive, because you're putting it into legislation. So it's not maybe let the executive have a discussion. It's putting an obligation on the executive. I thought that was an improvement of what was actually suggested by the sponsor. So unless somebody was convincing me otherwise, I would think that'd be a good thing. May not always deliver what everybody's looking for, but
Yeah, okay.
fact of the matter is you're putting it on the table of executive, on the face of the bill.
Yeah, and as it's a cross-cutting, cross-department. I'll move on, because we're going to come back to who has authority and where responsibility lies later on in Clause 4. But Clause 3 is the enabling power, which allows departments to establish pooled budgets and share resources to achieve the outcomes. Now, many of the stakeholders supported this provision. They considered it would make it easier for departments to share resources and staff with the objective of delivering outcomes. It was felt resources could be targeted in a more cost-effective manner, and it was also felt that savings would ensue. NILGA suggested this could be strengthened to include the collaborative use of resources by public bodies in general and the alignment of plans. Playboard, they suggested the power should be extended to include agencies, and an approach to the joint commissioning of services should also be adopted. The Children's Law Centre believes that it should not simply be an enabling power, but actually should be a statutory obligation on Northern Ireland and also on UK government departments and agencies. Some stakeholders pointed to DSC delivering social change. They said that was an example of good practice in pooling budgets. And in their evidence, officials advised that pooling budgets can be effective where a common goal or vision is shared by 2 or more departments. But they also said processes already exist to move money around to deliver on that. A number of our stakeholders, including the Department of Education and NILGA, stressed the need for the establishment of clear governance and accountability. OFMDFM states provisions on the arrangements for such funds would be required, for example, a memorandum of understanding, objectives for a fund, procedures for managing and accounting of those funds. Finally, the bill sponsor was in the view that once the accountability structures and systems were in place, there would be a much more efficient system and resources would be freed up to be put into services. Pooled budgets are also a way to prevent an issue falling between the cracks where no one department has the overall responsibility for driving the matter forward. Thoughts, members?
Is there something around you see local government there, you have the power of well-being, which allows councils to intervene in certain cases where they feel. Is there any potential conflict in that? Because to say in terms of community planning, there's an obligation on all departments and agencies to work together, and so is there something along that line parallel, to that, for example, or is there any potential conflict in that, or is it in addition to that? See, if you know what I mean, because councils can then say, well, actually, you're not doing that, we're going to now do that, and we're going to bill you for it.
Certainly, I think the local government reps who came in thought that there were implications that hadn't been fully thought through. And I'm not sure we're any further forward.
I think it's always, for me, like, it is about getting the balance, because you do want people to cooperate, you do want people to put their money where their mouths are in terms of departments and agencies, but it's just the balance between executive authority between different departments and then what is in essence an NDPB dictate. I just be a wee bit nervous, but I'm just conscious of that.
Well, are you proposing we seek further information or clarification?
Equally, you could have some provision in this bill which would be akin to, you know, power of well-being. Wouldn't be ruling it out, but I would think about that.
Okay. Okay, we shall do that. Thanks, Alex. Famous Clause 4 is next, members. This proposes to amend the Children Northern Ireland Order of 1995. And the aim of that would be strengthening the work being carried out by the Children and Young People's Strategic Partnership. A range of agencies and departments are specified in that and will be required to cooperate with each other in the planning, the commissioning and the delivery of children's services. The department has noted that the balance of powers between the Health and Social Care Board and other public bodies in this clause appears to them to be inappropriate. During the oral evidence, some members voiced their own concerns that appeared to give the HSCB powers over and above executive departments, and that, of course, impacts on democratic accountability. However, this was not a view that was necessarily shared by all. Children in Northern Ireland, however, did suggest the clause could be amended to place a duty on the executive. The Children's Law Centre were advising us that it wished to see the insertion of a clause requiring consultation with children and young people and with relevant public bodies regarding reviews and modifications to plans. And Nikki, the Commissioner for Children and Young People, considers that children and young people should be included as a named partner in this clause. Include youth. They suggested the Department of Employment and Learning should be included. And Anne Godfrey, if you remember, Anne came and gave evidence to us. She wished to add the voice of children, advising that all relevant bodies should be included and early intervention should be referenced. Ms Godfrey provided a suggested text for an amendment, and that is at page 65 of your packs. Just pause there to bring it up. It's also been pointed out to us in evidence that the Children's Order focuses on children in need, and that is at odds with the intention of the bill, which applies to all children and young people, a point we made earlier. The bill sponsor has acknowledged this point and advised he's working with departmental officials on potential amendments to deal with that tension. OFMDFM have suggested that the Children's Order should not be amended. Rather, there should be a standalone clause which would mean that a relevant department, under the authority of the Executive, would be responsible for the development and delivery of a children and young people's plan. And this would be developed with regard to the strategy and in collaboration. And it would detail 4 key areas. Number 1, how children's services will be planned, commissioned and delivered by the relevant partners. 2, the key actions, programmes and services which are to be taken or commissioned by the relevant partners. Number 3, it would detail the targets to be used in assessing the effectiveness of the actions taken. And finally, it would define how the key outcomes detailed in the strategy will be supported and achieved. So, members, can I also direct you to correspondence from the Health Minister? It's page 3 of your table packs. The Minister notes that legal advice to the Health Department indicates Clause 4 cannot amend the Children's Order to achieve the policy purpose of the bill in respect of children's services planning, and a standalone provision will be required. The Minister also considers that should the provisions relating to the Children's Order be removed, there should still be a level of focus in the new clause to cover planning and reporting, and has also raised a number of other matters that should be given consideration. Now, as I understand it, health officials are meeting this afternoon with officials from OFMDFM and others with a view to taking this forward, so there's not a lot we can do except to be aware that that meeting is taking place and to ask for a brief on the outcomes, if you're content. And finally, on Clause 4, members, the second part to make subordinate legislation is contained in this clause. This allows DHS-SPS to amend by order the list of consultation bodies in a new paragraph, which is 2A7. Those are the bodies to be consulted in a review of the paragraph. This is subject to draft affirmative procedure, and it's the examiner's view this seems to be an appropriate level of assembly control. So a lot to consider there, members. And primarily it's about who does what in terms of the children and young people's strategic partnership, and perhaps above all the HSCB, Health and Social Care Board. OFMDFM does not think there isn't an appropriate balance of power here, so they are working on an amendment.
That's the concern I have. Is I'm not just clear in my own mind about the role of an NDPP having such executive. I'd end up with maybe a good thing. I mean, if I'm happy with that, but just to see how that will actually work out in practice.
Well,
I think it'd end up with an unnecessary conflict.
I think I would propose the most sensible thing to do is for each member in each group to take a view, so that when we see the amendment from the department, you're able to make a pretty swift assessment of whether that concurs with your own position.
I think we're discussing something that could, be very fluid at the minute, you know, so it'd be probably sensible to take that approach.
It's one of the key questions we have to address, isn't it, really? It's really at the
It is at the core of it. So I would propose we move on for it with recommendation that we not only, as we're seeking some clarifications from the department on foot of this discussion, that we also ask for the earliest sight possible of any proposed amendments that they're going to bring forward, which will help speed the process, which I think everybody is interested in. Okay. Clause 5 is interpretation. It defines children and young people in accordance with the meaning prescribed in the Commissioner for Children and Young People Northern Ireland Order of 2003. In reacting to that, NILGA noted that there's no standard approach to how councils define young people. In fact, the inclusion of under-25s applies in certain areas and on certain occasions. Parents of children with acquired brain injury advised in their written submission the bill should cater for young people up to the age of 23. The bill's sponsor indicated that legislation defines young people as up to the age of 21, in line with the 2003 order, but he was also open to feedback and an alternative definition if proposed. The Children's Law Centre advised it wished to see the inclusion of a definition of functions in the bill in line with the Northern Ireland Act of 1998, and I believe the 98 Act that talks about functions as being powers and
Duties.
powers and duties. Powers and duties. But there's another Northern Ireland Act from 1954 which talks about powers, duties and jurisdiction as the definition of functions. I would have thought we might usefully seek the department's current thinking on what they consider the definition of functions to be.
Chair, if it's helpful, functions is referred to in the Interpretation Act. The Interpretation Act, Northern Ireland 1954, gives us a list of terms that don't need to be defined in each and every separate piece of legislation.
Right.
So terms that are commonly used include terms like functions.
And that 54 Act has jurisdiction as well as powers.
I couldn't comment on that one particularly, but I did look up functions, and functions is listed as including duties and powers. I think I've put it here.
I think that's the one that has duties, powers.
Functions shall include jurisdictions, powers and duties under the Section 46 of the Interpretation Act. So this means that unless you want to give it a particular unique definition within this bill, then you can rely on the Interpretation Act to give you the definition.
So if we don't amend it, the word as it appears in this bill refers to jurisdiction, powers and duties. And again, members, you can mull that over. Okay. Final kind of point on this clause 5 in interpretation, members, is the NSPCC felt it should be made clear that references to the department in clause 4 is not a reference to OFMDFM but to the Department for Health, Social Services and Public Safety. I suppose if it's ambiguous.
Sorry, Chair. In terms of it, because it's amending other legislation, it's referring to the department in the other legislation, which is Department of Health, Social Services and Public Safety. So, in some ways, it's clear, but in some ways, it is. You know, I can see where the confusion might arise. Yeah.
Okay.
Given that you're expecting a fairly comprehensive amendment on this to redo this entire provision, I would imagine that point will be addressed by OLC for the department.
So it's unlikely we'll need to have to worry about it. Okay. Clause 6 is the short title. No problems with that. Good. Now, in the terms of the long title, members, Anne Godfrey suggested the long title should be amended to include the requirement on agencies to discharge their functions and cooperate in order to contribute to the achievement of the specified outcomes through an amendment to the Children Northern Ireland Order of 1995. OFMDFM suggested the insertion of a new clause clearly setting out the intention of the bill, and SINI Children in Northern Ireland also felt there should be a clear narrative which sets out the essence of the bill and outlines what's required at both departmental and agency level. And in fact, I think when we got the expert briefing, one of the points made to us was you should sit down the bill sponsor and just ask that person, what are you trying to do? And that should be an articulation of the intention of the bill. So are we reasonably content we would like that amendment?
Anne Godfrey's amendment, you said?
Right?
Was that Anne Godfrey's amendment?
Anne Godfrey suggested a specific amendment which would say that we're spelling out that there's a requirement on agencies to discharge their functions. But it was really Daniel Greenberg who said, you know, if you're unclear about the intent of a bill, you should ask the sponsor. And normally that transcription is as good as you'll get.
I think, sorry, the other thing about Anne Godfrey's suggested amendment does leave in amendment to the Children Northern Ireland Order 1995, depending on the potential for that actually not to happen. So that would have to be reconsidered as well.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Well, in the absence of any other comments, members, that's it until a proposal.
Sorry, just on clause 4, Nikki and the Children's Law Centre about an additional clause include the voice of children in consultation. Would that be dealt with by the department?
I think the department did suggest that that any changes, reporting, etc., would be done in consultation with stakeholders, which would include children and young people. But we can seek clarification on that as well.
So at this stage, members, as we're finishing for today on this issue, we have some, I think, points of clarification. We're also seeking early sight of proposed amendments from the department. I think we should do the same with the bill sponsor as well. Are you content if we indicate to the department that we are broadly supportive in principle of where we think they're going with their amendments, but we really need to see the text before we can take a formal view? Okay, thank you. I think as proposed, we'll consider draft amendments on the 27th of May and then do our formal clause-by-clause scrutiny on the 3rd of June. But of course that is dependent on getting those amendments. Thank you very much. So members, we're going to item 3 and we have a list of apologies. Alex Atwood, Michael Copeland, Brenda Hale, Bronwyn McGahan, Stephen Moutry and Jimmy Spratt. I don't think there's a need to ask if we're aware of any other apologies because the rest of us are here. Chairperson's business. Well, since we met last, there's a new junior minister in the department, so can I suggest we write both to Michelle McIlveen to wish her well in her new role and also to Jonathan Bell to thank him for his attention and wish him well in Detty. Page 94 is next. There's an invitation to a Westminster e-forum seminar on delivering digital government. It's in London on Thursday the 25th of June. Then at page 99, an invitation to a policy forum for Northern Ireland keynote seminar on the future of health and social care delivery following the Donaldson report. That's in Belfast on Wednesday, September 16th. And on page 7 of table papers, there's an invitation from the Committee for Employment and Learning. This is a further education showcase event in the Long Gallery on Tuesday, the 19th of May. Can I ask you respond directly if you wish to attend any of those 3 events? Our current invitations are on page 104. And in the absence of comment on that, members, the draft minutes of our meeting of the 27th of April are on page 107 and thereafter. Are we agreed that these draft minutes can be adopted? Thank you. At page 112 is a list of outstanding correspondence. In the absence of comment on that, I refer you to the correspondence summary sheet on page 115. That's correspondence received since the last meeting, and I'll now ask the clerk to highlight items she thinks we require to make a decision upon. And you are, of course, free to raise any other item of correspondence.
Thanks, Chair. The first item is at page 129. It's a response from the Department of Environment to the Committee's request for more information on how its Living Spaces and Urban Stewardship and Design Guide for Northern Ireland connects with the TPUC strategy. And the responses, in fact, is just to check if members are happy to include that for the inquiry papers. The second item is at page 138. There's correspondence from the Committee for Finance and Personnel regarding the monitoring of savings delivery plans. And it shows that OFMDFM anticipates exceeding its published savings target for 14-15 by 1.5 million, mainly due to the reduction in the use of external consultants by the Strategic Investment Board. At page 147, there's correspondence regarding sickness absence, and the indicative outturn for the department for 13-14 is 8.3 working days, which is lower than last year's figure. It's above the target, but the provisional figures show that no department has actually made its target for 14-15. So it's just to ask if members are content once the department's annual report and accounts for 14-15 are available, if we seek a briefing from the department with specific commentary on both the savings delivery plans and the sickness absence for the year. Just to draw the members' attention, at page 150, we've had a response from First and Deputy First Minister to the invitation to brief the committee before the end of this session, and I'll work with DALO to arrange the date for that. And then finally, at page 157, there's correspondence regarding a survey for the Northern Ireland European Regional Forum. And during the most recent PFG briefing, the committee was advised there was a need to look at the range of fora that contribute to engagement with Europe and to consider what the future of the fora should be. So it's just to see if the committee wishes to ask to be kept up to date with the progress of that work and informed of any decisions at the earliest opportunity. And that's it as far as.
Thanks, Cathy. I think that last item is something we should keep an eye on. I think those certainly involved in it think it's a very successful operation, and I think they sense existential threat to their future. So, next, members.
Chair, can I just raise a couple of issues on the correspondence there? Item 7.2, the All-Party Group on Ethnic Minority Communities wrote to First and Deputy First Minister on the 24th of April to request a meeting in relation to the Minority Ethnic Development Fund. Would it be possible to contact the department to ask if they responded to that letter? I'm not aware whether they have or not. And at 7.7, the department provided us with further information in relation to a number of PFG commitments, one of which is the Together Building a United Community Nursery and Primary School Buddy Scheme. The information says that from the Department of Education, a draft business case has been progressed. If it would be possible to ask the department for an update as to where exactly that business case is, what stage the business case is at. Do so today, I suppose, as well. Yeah. Okay.
Let's see how you get on with your oral inquiry.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. No
I think,
problem.
Chair, on the latter note, I would have absolutely no difficulties with it. I think the first one, whilst I'm a member of that all-party group and I'm entirely, keen to get to the bottom of it as well, but there's a lot of all-party groups, and I think if we took the view that that committees are going to get involved with what they're doing, then I think we could find ourselves maybe going down a road that there may not be a way back from. Obviously, most committees have taken a decision. We don't deal with like individual cases, for example, if a constituent or somebody writes in. And I personally would probably take the view that party group should be viewed upon in that guise as well, because they're an ever-growing number.
Yeah, but this I think is about NICEM, and NICEM are a group we take evidence from. It's an area of OFMDFM, so I think there is actually.
It's just a procedural inquiry as well, is to ask if a response was issued. It's not getting into the detail of it at all.
Okay, members, draft work programme is at page 171. May I ask, are you content with the proposed way forward? Okay. Okay. Members, we have one evidence session, and I understand we're going to have to finish this by 4 o'clock because we will not be quorate in any sense at that time. So let's focus in here. It's an evidence session relating to our inquiry into building a united community. On the 25th of March, we considered a paper highlighting the issues brought to the committee through written and oral evidence. At the stakeholder events, we agreed to send it to the department in advance of a final evidence session with officials, which is now. The clerk's brief is at page 159, the issues paper at 160. A written departmental response to those issues was received today at 9:08 a.m. It's in your table packet, page 10. For your information, correspondence from the department outlined the budget profiles for progressing T-Buck initiatives in 15-16, and that is at page 167. So we welcome Peter Robinson, Michael McGinley, Donna Blaney, and Lindsay Farrell. Is it yourself, Lindsay?
It is, yes. Thank you, Chair. I'll make a few brief opening remarks, if that's okay. So thank you, Chair, for your introduction and for the invitation to appear here today to update the committee on progress with the implementation of Together Building a United Community and to respond to the common themes which emerged from the inquiry into the strategy's implementation. Together Building a United Community was published on the 23rd of May 2013, following the announcement of 7 strategic headline actions by the First Minister and Deputy First Minister on the 9th of May. We've had the opportunity to brief the committee previously in February and October of 2014 in relation to implementation of the strategy, and we welcome this further opportunity to comment on the responses received in response to the inquiry. As you're aware, the range of commitments and actions contained in the TBUC strategy extend well beyond the 7 headline actions, and in total there are in the region of 42 actions and commitments, which compositely will contribute to achieving our vision of a shared, united and reconciled community. I acknowledge the view raised through inquiry responses that the headline actions in and of themselves will not address all of the issues that divide our community. However, it is a long-term strategy and one that we believe will evolve over time. I'd like to commence by focusing on the responses received to the inquiry, and while it is impossible to cover each and every issue raised, I will focus on a number of the key issues which have been highlighted throughout. We welcome the wide range of interest from organisations who have responded to the inquiry, and I believe this is testimony to the real passion that exists across our community to building a united, shared and reconciled society. From an analysis of the responses received, there are a number of common themes that have been identified, and I'll cover each of these in turn. In respect of the level of engagement or involvement with the sector, there certainly was a lengthy public consultation on the Executive's draft CSI strategy and further stakeholder engagement as part of the detailed design of the many actions being delivered. The establishment of the thematic subgroups have also provided vital opportunities for engagement with the sector, and we look forward to developing this engagement as the subgroups take forward their work. In respect of communications, we are working to develop a stakeholder newsletter to show the continuing progress in implementation of the strategy and other good relations activities. We are also working closely with the Community Relations Council to enhance our opportunities to engage with stakeholders in a more structured way. Over the coming months, we hope to hold a number of events which will also provide a platform to communicate the work which has been taken forward under the strategy and highlight other successes that have been achieved as a result of good work right across our community. A number of the comments received focused on funding issues, and we acknowledge that it has not always been possible to provide the groups with early notification of funding. For 2015-16, steps have been taken to ensure that funding is released earlier in the new financial year. This has been made possible by the Executive's commitment to allocate £10 million of funding towards the delivery of the strategy. This has facilitated the allocation of funding to be made earlier in the year and funding programmes to commence promptly. Letters of offer have been issued to 6 of the councils in April, and we plan to be in a position to agree the remaining 5 before the end of May. Officials are currently working with these 5 councils to ensure their planned programmes of work meet the department's requirements. The assessment of the applications to the North Belfast programme was also completed in April, and letters of offer issued to the 12 contract holders in week commencing 4th of May, dependent on the contract holders' ability to revise their applications as appropriate to ensure they are sufficiently outcome focused and all programmes aligned to the aims of the TBUC strategy. In total, we received 175 applications to the Central Good Relations Fund, which closed on 20th of April. The assessment panel met initially on Monday the 11th of May, and officials are in the process of contacting groups that have been successful. The Summer Camp Multi-Agency Panel meets to review the applications to deliver 100 summer schools and camps during 2015 on the 20th of May, and we are on target to announce the successful projects in the week commencing 1st of June. Several issues have also been raised through the inquiry regarding the sharing of best practice. We are fully aware of the importance of sharing best practice, and it is something that we're continually seeking to do. The Good Relations Officer Conference is a good example of sharing, which provides a space for sharing of experiences of successful delivery of projects. And we're also actively discussing with our officers other ways of sharing best practice through a new shared learning initiative within the structures of the new councils. The North Belfast Strategic Good Relations Programme bi-monthly forum has now progressed to a monthly forum due to demand from the groups and progression of the forum remit itself in response to learning and feedback from the 2014-15 programme. This forum is a key driver to facilitate the use of techniques such as outcomes-based accountability and mapping, which can be built on both in-year and incrementally through each iteration of the Strategic Good Relations Programme in North Belfast. This learning is vitally important to inform the work of other areas, as ideas from those areas are used to add value to the work of the North Belfast programme going forward. Through other fora led by the department, such as the Good Relations Programme Board, learning and best practice is shared across all departments. These fora facilitate the sharing of learning and knowledge to help inform plans, projects and programmes within other departments. And the department is also engaged closely with the Community Relations Council and other stakeholders to share information. And this engagement enables the department to give feedback directly to practitioners and other stakeholders, and it facilitates open and frank discussion on a range of issues. With enhanced community planning powers, the new councils have the potential to have greater involvement in many areas such as community relations. The department has been working with councils to facilitate this, and in particular to ensure alignment between the Good Relations action plans and the key priorities within Together Building a United Community, and further engagement with councils is planned. A further focus of the responses to the inquiry was on outcomes, and I can report that the performance monitoring framework for all programmes and projects related to TBUC will utilise an outcomes-based approach. This approach has involved the development of departmental guidance based on outcomes-based methodology to monitor and evaluate actions and activities flowing from projects. Respondees have expressed concerns on an absence of definitions within the strategy. However, it is our view that actions are outlined in the strategy to address these issues. For example, sectarianism. Whilst there is a definition of sectarianism in the strategy, a commitment is given to find an appropriate consensus around a definition to be included in the legislation for the Equality and Good Relations Commission. Good relations itself is currently defined in terms of the groups named in Section 75(2) of the Northern Ireland Act 1998. There is no additional definition within the strategy. However, a commitment is given to reviewing and revising the good relations indicators that will measure the desired impacts of good relations activities for each of the 4 priority areas in the strategy. The revised indicators have now been agreed by ministers following extensive consultation with a wide range of stakeholders. Within the context of the implementation of the strategy, the revised indicators and associated outcomes will be used to monitor progress at a population level and will provide the strategic performance measurement framework that will underpin the measurement of impacts across the strategy's headline actions, associated programmes and funding streams, including the District Council Good Relations actions. The issue of equality screening has also been raised as an issue within the context of the inquiry. Through the Good Relations Programme Board, assurances have been sought from all departments that they are fulfilling their statutory obligations in terms of the delivery of their headline actions on a regular basis. Officials within OFMDFM have carried out an equality impact screening of the TBUC Summer Camps pilot programme for 2015-16, and at this stage no negative impacts have been identified, and as such the policy will be screened out. However, given that this is a pilot programme, it has been decided that this decision will be kept under review in the event that additional impacts should be identified as the programme rolls out. I'd now like to provide a brief update on the headline actions contained within the strategy, if time allows, Chair.
I'd rather do that.
Do you want to start?
5 minutes?
The usual.
Yeah. We've certainly gone over 5 minutes.
That's okay.
Okay. First question is, why was the paper submitted at 8 minutes past 9 this morning?
The papers were under consideration within the department.
When were they written?
Really, the date on which they were written or submitted to private offices is immaterial to the date on which they issue, because it's another part of the wider processes within the department that allow engagement between ministers and officials and that ongoing discussion around issues.
I see with regard to the summer camps, the closing date for applications to be submitted to the Education Authority is the 8th of May 2015. That use of tense tells me it was written well before the 8th of May. Lindsay, you know that papers are supplied every Monday to the implementation group of the Stormont House Agreement, days in advance, regularly, no issue with prompt delivery. And yet this committee is entirely disrespected on a weekly basis by the same people.
I can't comment on that other than to say
Okay.
they were under consideration in the department.
Together Building a United Community is a strategy which celebrates its 2nd birthday this month. How much have you spent?
In terms of good relations in general, on
How much have you spent on TBUC in the
actions?
last 24 months?
In the 24 months, particularly in 2014-15, we delivered in the region of £9 million to support good relations activity across a number of programmes. I believe they're cited in the briefing document that the committee has received in terms of the range of funding programmes.
How much of that would not have been spent had it not been for TBUC? How much would have been spent anyway on good relations?
I mean, well, certainly the TBUC allocation within this year's budget was only agreed within the context of the Stormont House Agreement and the budget settlement, and a £10 million allocation. From that, just over £8 million has been allocated across the headline actions.
Are you saying to me that the £9 million you've just said has been spent would have been spent anyway, whether there was TBUC or not?
Not necessarily. I believe that there was a real commitment given within the context of the publication of Together Building a United Community. It represented a commitment across the executive, and particularly with ministers, to ensure that resources were available, particularly at a time when resources were depleting in other areas of work. Together Building a United Community has continued to be an area that has become a priority, and certainly a priority that has attracted funding, and not in the same way that other areas have suffered, and there's a real priority given to it, and those funding schemes are testimony to that.
So how much of the £9 million would have been spent anyway, and how much is attributable directly to TBUC being in existence?
Donna may know well the detail of spend before that, but it certainly wouldn't have been to that level, Donna.
No, it wouldn't have been. Without having the exact figures for the difference between what would have been spent and what was spent, but certainly through in-year bids towards TBUC, we achieved additional funding for the District Council's Good Relations Programme, additional funding for the Central Good Relations Programme, additional funding for the North Belfast Strategic Good Relations Programme, and additional funding for the Summer Interventions Programme as well. And
in round terms, what would that add up to?
You know, it's going towards at least 3 million. You know, that's just off the top of my head.
Okay.
We can certainly check out the exact figures and write back to the committee if that would be useful.
2 years, 3 million.
And now 10 million, in fact 13 million.
A programme that launched with the then junior First Minister saying it was a £500 million initiative. 3 million spent in 2 years.
I think the figure of £500 million was taking in the amount of expenditure across a range of funding programmes, including what's put in by the executive. Piece 3 was a significant player in terms of promoting good relations and reconciliation, and again a proportion of that is provided by the Northern Ireland Administration, and OFMDFM is the accountable department for that. So I think if you take in the expenditure under Piece 3, other external funders such as IFI, Atlantic Philanthropies, that we jointly funded the Contested Spaces programme with, it does represent a significant expenditure in good relations over the period. And since the beginning of this financial year, we now have £10 million specifically ring-fenced to support the delivery and implementation of TBUC across all departments.
In what way is Northern Ireland better off because of TBUC?
I think Northern Ireland is better off because we now have a strategic framework for good relations. Previously, we were working with a direct rule document, a shared future. Now the executive has its own good relations strategy, a framework for action that the community has largely, although issues have been raised around its implementation, and some of those are included within the inquiry, the community has embraced the fact that there's now a framework for action for them to align their work with. What we were hearing previously was there was a bit of a vacuum where they had nothing to pin their work to. It sets out a clear vision for the type of society that we all want to live in. It sets out 4 key strategic priorities that we want to focus on over the lifetime of the strategy, and it sets out a number of quite quite challenging headline actions, but also a range of somewhere in the region of 42 other actions and commitments to be taken forward by departments. But there's no doubt that it's a longer-term strategy. And
you say challenging headline actions. You include, for example, summer camps. Summer camps have been happening for decades. What's challenging about running a summer camp?
I think summer interventions have been happening for decades. Summer schools and camps represents a new approach to how we engage with young people.
That's not what we heard when we took evidence.
Well, certainly for our view in the department, and again, Donna will want to come in the detail of this and the detailed design there's been with stakeholders, and their involvement in putting together the design has shown the importance of it's not just working with children and young people for 3 to 4 days in the summer to divert them from periods of tension. It's about engagement before and after, and Donna can...
Very happy for Donna to
detail
come
it.
in, but perhaps you will include this as well, Donna, because when we had our stakeholder event, I happened to be sitting at a table to my left was a woman who works in youth services, and her speciality is summer camps. And in May of 2013, when TBUC was announced, she was very excited, and she sat by her phone thinking, you guys are going to phone in a day or two, because I have all the expertise in the world, and you're going to want to tap into it. She waited 18 months for that phone call. So I'd like you to take that on board as you're responding to what Lindsay had to say as well, please.
Well, what we've been doing over that interim period has been recognising that summer camps have been going on for a number of reasons and to deliver a number of outcomes. But summer camps in the context of Together Building a United Community is something different. The aspiration at the beginning was to create the opportunity for young people attending these to build and maintain sustainable relationships that they maybe wouldn't have had the opportunity in their day-to-day lives. So we have carried out an extensive engagement process with the stakeholders, and hopefully the person you have referred to has had the opportunity. We've had over 200 stakeholders engage in the co-design process, including people who have direct experience of delivering summer camps, and youth workers and young people themselves. And we've had almost 300 attendees at workshops in preparation for the applications to the summer camps. But as a result of that process, we've been able to design a programme that will deliver specific outcomes for these camps, and they're very defined. And those are things along the lines that as a result of these camps, the attendees will have positive attitudinal change towards people from a different background. Sustained contact and friendships developed between the young people from different backgrounds. Young people are more positive about shared activities. That there's better recognition that the role that young people play in peace building, and that young people have a better understanding and respect for cultural differences. And that's the focus of this actual scheme. We do other summer camps which are called sort of planned interventions, and those are much more generic, and they're more about facilitating people at times of specific community tension and maybe taking them out of their area. But this is quite a different programme, and our stakeholders have welcomed that, and particularly the young people as well. They want something different. They just don't want to go away on a certain night and spend some time and then go back and never see these people again.
So these are summer camps the likes of which Northern Ireland has never seen before.
Well, hopefully we have at the minute 154 applications to deliver those, and those will be assessed in the next couple of weeks.
And will they all be new camps, or will some of them have happened before but simply be reshaped to meet your objective?
Well, we will be assessing them to make sure that we have people that are delivering that have experience of working with young people, that people have experience of delivering camps, or people who don't have experience delivering camps are working together with experienced people to deliver camps that will have these outcomes at the end of the day. And one of the unique aspects of this is that there's a pre and post engagement, so it's not the fact that they just go off and take a group of young people for 3 or 5 days, but they actually start to build a relationship at a pre-engagement process and then a post-engagement process, so that young people can use social media, whatever ways they wish to keep in contact. And then hopefully, or we do plan in the late autumn, early winter, to have a shared learning forum and some sort of celebration event where we can bring the young people that have participated back, tell us what has worked well, what hasn't. Because remember, this is a pilot, and inform how we'll go forward in the future.
Yeah, but it was a pilot last year as well.
We had some pilots that we delivered, but that was before and during the engagement process. Those pilots have also informed us. We wanted to make sure that this was shaped to be different, and it actually delivered for the young people that are participating in it.
Okay, I'm a young person, you prep me, I go to a camp first week of August and I know what to expect and I come through the camp. What happens after that?
Then there's after the camp, there'll be another post-engagement.
And when would that be? If I'm first week of August, I've done the camp. When do you?
Well, it'll be up to the project deliverers, because the people that are making the applications to deliver the camps have to include a pre and a post-engagement phase.
Was it just one engagement? Is it one meeting?
It can be a day's event. There's a number of there's a set number of hours within the design of the programme for face-to-face contact between the programme deliverers and the young people. So it's not that they just take them away to a museum and put them in and put them back on the bus at the end of the day. And then in addition...
But specifically what happens, I've been to the camp. How long do I wait before the organisers are back in touch, and how often do they get in touch? How many post-camp events are there?
For this year, there's one post-event organised by your camp deliverer, but
one.
But that's followed up by another event in the late autumn, early winter, which we will organise, which will be a mixture of a celebration event and a shared learning forum. They may actually take 2 events.
And that's it?
For this pilot of 2015. But the important bit is we will take the learning from that to inform how we need to do it differently if the participants and the deliverers tell us that it's not as effective, and how we build in this online or continuous monitoring to see if it's effective, because you can't really tell the next week have people had sustainable relationships, and we will need to build that monitoring in.
And I think certainly those are exactly the sorts of things we'll want to be testing through this pilot stage. Certainly when we are looking at assessing the applications, we'll be looking for innovative ideas, different delivery models to allow us to test how this will work in practice. But also what we're looking at is how we can signpost and cross-refer across the various headline actions of TBUC as well. If there's a young person involved in a summer camp, that it may be useful to signpost them to United Youth, or indeed to the cross-community sports programme. So we're looking at that within the context of the outcomes framework as well.
Certainly my reading of the evidence we have taken so far is that if engagement isn't continual, not continuous, but continual, it's potentially a waste. Deputy Chair Chris Little.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your update. I'd start by wishing you well as you get further into the detail of doing the actual work on delivery of the strategy. I've worked with some of you closely before, and I know that you're genuinely committed to doing this work. I don't envy your challenge of building a united community in a political context where parties seem content to represent what they believe is their community, but I think you're well committed to trying to deliver that nonetheless. Can I ask, has community relations improved in the 2 years from the publication of TBUC?
Certainly. Thanks for your comments, Chris. Certainly, in terms of the good relations indicators they did show indications of where improvements had been made, albeit there were other indicators that showed in some ways that relationships weren't improving. And I think that was why it was a key commitment given to look at those indicators and to review those in light of Together Building a United Community. I'd often heard the indicators referred to as bad relations indicators as opposed to something more positive in terms of good relations, and I think that's what we've tried to do through the engagement process and the consultation on the indicators, to develop indicators that can align to TBUC, to align to the outcomes we're trying to achieve, to really get down to what are the key differences we need to make right across our society, to young people, to shared spaces, to a safe community and to cultural expression that really will make a tangible impact. I think it's the word impact we're looking for in terms of building good relations. Now that those have been agreed, they can form the basis of the outcomes framework that we produce, and then we can really be serious about measuring the impact that TBUC has. In the absence of those agreed indicators aligned with TBUC, it was maybe a bit of a skewed picture before that point.
How far off are you from agreeing the new good relations indicators, and will you be able to present those to the committee in the near future?
Check that out, yeah, and there will hopefully be a launch, and we'd obviously be engaging with the committee in advance of that happening.
It has been quite a while since they've been under review, yeah.
They were out to consultation. They went through a couple of periods of consultation and worked with an advisory group. Peter, is there anything you want to add to that?
Just that we have been looking at in terms of the departmental funding schemes and also the funding schemes that the CRC deliver, and ensuring that in terms of the application processes that are going out this year, that those good relations indicators are incorporated into the application process. So whenever groups apply for funding, they have to show what impact the interventions they're taking forward, how they see them contributing to the impact in terms of good relations indicators.
We were discussing earlier the Children's Services Bill, and there's proposals to have annual reports, on performance against those outcomes. Is there any possibility of annual reporting as to performance against good relations outcomes or indicators?
Absolutely. It was actually discussed. We were at a Good Relations Programme Board meeting this morning with the departments involved in delivery. So the plan is that they will get guidance on the outcomes-based approach. And we've already been working with departments to develop a number of shared outcomes across all of the headline actions. And then departments will submit report cards against each of those outcomes, and the programme board will monitor the progress against all of those and produce a report on the basis of the information received.
I suppose just to add, over the next year we'll be working with the groups, the funded groups, in terms of helping them be able to produce similar reports in terms of report cards in terms of the impact and their outcomes.
In the absence of that type of reporting, it's quite difficult to make an assessment as to what impact the headline actions are not having. Yep.
I suppose the issue with the headline actions were there were fairly significant projects, a lot of them, and there was a lot of work to go through in terms of governance and business cases. Now we're really entering the stage of true implementation, and we'll be able to measure the real impact of those as resources flow and the community start to see the real benefits of those.
Taking one of the actions, you mentioned the Contested Spaces programme that was co-funded with Atlantic Philanthropies that seemed to have some really good positive impacts, and one scheme attached to that was the nursery school buddy scheme. And one of the actions in TBUC is obviously the rollout of nursery and primary school cross-community buddy schemes. It's my understanding that rests with the Department of Education, but do you have any update with regards to the status of the business case being progressed to roll out that action?
The latest update we'd had from DE was they were still going through that process. We can certainly seek to receive a further update from them, but also just to say that community relations in schools who've been delivering a buddy scheme have been successful in receiving core funding from the Community Relations Council. So that, again, that was money flowing from the department to support that work, and I think the amount of money has actually increased in recognition of the work that they've been doing in the buddy scheme as well.
Okay. Another key item of TBUP was to deliver an enhanced good relations impact assessment for all policies across government. And I think that linked in with the Stormont House agreement for an independent audit of departmental spend to identify how division in society impacts on the delivery of public services. Any update as to progress on those key items?
It was intended that that would be one of the issues taken forward within the context of the Equality and Good Relations Commission. What we're doing while the legislation's under consideration is working with both the Equality Commission and the Community Relations Council to identify those areas that they can work on within their existing remits and varies as they are, and we plan to engage with them even further over the next period of time, and that will be one of the specific actions mentioned in TBUC that we'll be looking at.
And given the fact that a previous OFMDFM audit had the cost of division upwards of £1 billion, are there any moves to carry out that Stormont House agreement to conduct an independent audit of all departmental spending?
The First Minister and Deputy First Minister have written to executive colleagues just reminding them of that Stormont House commitment, the structures that are in place already through DSC and Together Building a United Community. The head of the Civil Service will be following up shortly with permanent secretaries around that as well to assess how we can look at the cost of division across all of these areas, but bearing in mind the existing structures that are in place with DSC and TBUC already. TBUC had also committed to commissioning a piece of research around identifying shared services and the extent of shared service delivery, and again that's something we'd be exploring further.
Okay. I hope you get the ministerial support you need to expedite delivery on these really important issues, so thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Yes, Lindsay, you talked about going into the implementation phase, and one of the objectives you have to implement is the creation of 10 new shared education campuses. Each campus obviously will be a multi-billion pound initiative. How much implementation do you think you'll do this financial year, given that I've just seen that your paper, which we got at 9:08 this morning, advises the budget for the 10 new shared education campuses this year is £200,000?
That's £200,000 of resource budget that was bid for from the Department of Education, and they secured that bid from the TBUC allocation to progress business cases. And this was the point I was making in relation to a number of the headline actions, that there's a lot of processes to go through, particularly where there's capital build involved, and the shared educational campuses would be one of those areas. But DE has advised that the first 3 successful applications for shared campuses are going through that process now. In fact, one of those is actually wanting to go even further with their application and to become more ambitious, and DE is working with that particular campus. Second call closed for applications, and DE is currently considering the applications of those, but certainly there will be good progress made on the initial first 3 in terms of business case approvals and gearing up for spend to be able to happen on the capital side.
Okay. We may only have 10 minutes late before we lose 10 minutes left before we become no longer quoted. So it's split about 5-5, if that's okay. Alex and David both want in, and Alex is first on the list.
Sure.
I only need 2, so
Don't tell him. Don't tell him, Pike.
I mean, there's a couple of kind of just questions we're looking addressed, but general commentary, I mean, like the Vice Chair there, I mean, I don't envy the task because I'm not sure exactly what everybody wants out of this whole process. I think some people expect a light switch to be turned on and we're all going to be the same and our wee Northern Ireland and everything will be wonderful. But that's not going to happen because we're not all the same, different, and there's nothing wrong with that. And the trick is how do we manage so we can deal with that and embrace that and respect it and all the rest of that. One of the things that kind of concerned me a wee bit was some of the evidence sessions from people who have immense respect for, who've worked a lifetime in terms of, on cold faces and at interfaces and everything else. But I sort of sometimes felt like hunting some of an elephant because it's always like a big lot of the focus was, what do you mean by sectarianism? You haven't told us what you mean by that. Well, I might have a definition, somebody else might have a definition. So I'm trying to work out what, and these are people who are genuinely trying to grapple with what they can do. So I'm very much appreciative of the work being done around whether summer camps or whatever else. I'd be very keen to see how they do work out because I've no doubt there'll be difficulties with because how do you measure some of the outcome? And I know the Chair was pressing around about how many engagements do you have to have in relation to a camp, one before, during the camp and one afterwards. But you're talking about organisations which are working around the clock, 24 hours, all year round, funded. Work on these issues, so surely it couldn't possibly be a one-day prep meeting and then the camp and then another day success. This has to be a continuum of work. I would presume because the people who are doing the camps are going to be people who are working at this work anyway. And I've no doubt, I'm sure certain there'll be people who will be trying to get camps organised this year, which is as much around diversionary work, which may be a bit challenging. I mean, I've been at some of the residential young people, and some of it is around taking people away in the summer, getting them diversions, challenge them on some of their own ideas, but some of these sessions I think were quite good. But how do you measure the outworking of that and the outcome of that? I think it's actually quite difficult. So, I mean, good luck on all of that, because I do think the design of that is obviously critical. That's why one of the questions coming on to was around, when we did the round table and other discussions, including our evidence sessions, like people were talking about, I think in general term, people were saying the OFM officials are very good, they're out there a lot and they're attending all the meetings, but there were some issues around either co-design, is co-design been properly taken on board between the department and organisations out there who are doing great work for a long time. I'm interested to know what kind of clear outcomes yourselves would have when you're engaging with stakeholders, because it's a two-way process. You can't bring all the answers. You're bringing resources, you're bringing government commitments here, but you also want people to, yes, co-design, but also tell us what they mean. I mean, I've asked people, what do you mean by that? I know people who are working in the interface areas are working very, very well, but they're never going to move the other side of the interface, you know, so let's get real on some of that, you know what I mean? And do they always challenge each other? No, they don't. Sometimes they don't challenge themselves. So there's a wee bit of a, that's difficult, you know, there's a lot of work to be done, so I don't underestimate the difficulties. So for me, in terms of making sure this becomes in the longer term organic, what kind of challenges are we putting into this whole process from your own end of it, dealing with stakeholders, who, as I say, for the most part are excellent and doing great work? Yeah, if you know what I mean. And I'm just glad to see that there is a commitment through TBUC to give added support to that. But it has to be a two-way process as well as additional resource.
I suppose to me, there seems to be a subtle difference between consultation with stakeholders and co-design. And it's maybe been something that has taken a bit of time for all of us to understand and get our heads around. But consultation has traditionally been going out to stakeholders with our ideas and then asking them what they think. The approach that we've used through co-design has been going out with more of a blank page and saying, here's what we're trying to do. So here's the outcome we're trying to get to, which is linked to TBUC. Now, tell us from your experience and in your opinion, how can that best be done? How can it be best delivered? How can it be best designed? That's certainly the approach we've taken with summer schools and camps, because you're right, it's a two-way thing. You know, we have to tell them, obviously, from our point of view, what we're trying to do in government through the executive, but we need to listen to their experiences and their informed opinions from just their experiences out in the real world. And then together we design something that we believe is workable with our processes and governance, but will also meet their needs out in the community. But it certainly has been something we've found through the United Youth Programme, working with Dale, and more recently around the Summer Schools Camps programme. But you're right, there has to be a challenge back into the community, and I think that's something that we're trying to build into our subgroup structures, because again, it's no longer that it's just statutory agencies sitting around the table, but there's community representatives involved, and it's getting across to them that there's also an onus and responsibility on them to bring the information to us and for us all to collectively identify what we need to do, and then each of us take responsibility for the bits we can. Don, I'm not sure if there's anything in particular in relation to summer schools.
Well, I suppose it was a sort of a phased approach in that we had with the more generic stakeholder engagement, come co-design, like what should it look like, but then we had a specific design team which had the representatives from the statutory organisations, from the youth sector, then we had young people themselves from the Northern Ireland Youth Forum, Rice and Neats and District Council, so all the key players, which has come up with the current design, which it has to be a pilot, but then at the end of the year we'll go back and we'll take what we've learned and we'll write why did this work, why did it not, and that's the opportunity to introduce the challenge factor. And I think the fact that we have outcomes, that's a challenge to the applicants. So people have been applying for interventions and for camps, but when they looked at our scheme, it is quite different and it's more challenging. And it isn't to deliver the same, that's intentional. So some people will not maybe like that, but maybe this scheme isn't what they're interested in delivering. And we'll find that out as we go through the year.
And that's what we're trying to do with all the funded groups as well, right at the very start of the application process, making it clear in terms of the TBUC priorities and the associated indicators and outcomes. This is what we want to achieve. Now you tell us how you think your intervention, the best intervention you can make that'll contribute to the advancement of those outcomes and impacts. So it's very much, you know, we like to see the innovative approach they come up with, as long as there's a clear link between what they're doing and what we want to see in terms of the TBUC outcomes and impacts.
Okay. And it is 2 minutes.
No problem, Chair. I'll try and keep to that because I have to go at 4 as well, so I very much have to do that. It's almost a supplementary, actually, to what Alex has asked, because it's on the same sort of theme, and I have to be honest, I wouldn't be splitting hairs about whether there's one, further engagement, two, further engagements with departments. Because, I mean, in my view, this should be supported by department, not led by department, because, you know, there are plenty of people already doing this very, very well, and I suspect that they will be the people who are putting in the application forms, wanting to run these summer camps, because we all know kids are probably the hardest group to reach, and therefore there needs to be a bit of experience and expertise in order to do that. So with that in mind, I mean, bearing in mind that in every single part of our community, most likely on a Friday night, there are dozens upon dozens of community-led gatherings or church-led gatherings that have Protestant, Catholic, traveller, you know, Polish children in the midst of, you know, we've got the whole mix there. What can TBUC do to support those groups? Because they are the ones ultimately that I suspect are going to do the continuous work built upon this. I mean, has any thought been given to almost a sort of a curriculum for children and youth groups? Because if everybody throughout the whole of Northern Ireland, as far as these community-led groups, were all effectively, okay, it would have to be voluntary, but I don't think any of them would have a great objection to it as long as it's reasonable. If they're all effectively putting the same message across with the support of the department, with their arms being lifted up by the department to give them the capacity to do that, then why not tap into what's already there and support it, but bring a degree of, because I think Alex's absolutely right, everybody's different, but the message is the same. You know, it's about tolerance, it's about respect, and perhaps it's not, because I know certainly from my own experience, my little girls tried a few different things on a Friday night, and, you know, the message broadly speaking is the same, but it's being taught in a different way, and that's a little bit confusing. So perhaps if there was a little bit more structure to the whole thing, is that where perhaps the department could maybe find itself a role in sort of giving the capacity to these groups to sort of meet that final outcome that we want to get to?
I think that's a useful point, because one of the things we do grapple with is that sort of structured and standardisation, allowing the flexibility for groups to be able to do things in the way they feel at ease to do it, but some sort of structure and consistency of message, as you say, and that's potentially something that the children and young people subgroup, when it's up and running, could look at and explore ideas around. But certainly in recognition of the fact that the amount of work goes on across the community is delivered by community workers, community organisations, church faith-based groups. Those are certainly the sorts of groups we want to see applying to the summer schools and camps. We certainly want to assist and support those types of groups, and it's not about good relations just being the business of departments. I think it's about getting that message out that it's everybody's business, and I mean, these are the groups that have the relationships, and at the end of the day it's those relationships with young people that are so important, and those groups will be able to reach out to those young people in a way that we will never be able to as officials. And so it's really important that we see applications coming through from those types of organisations, and that's something we've tried to build into the design specifically for summer schools and camps, and I know other departments are doing the same around cross-community sports, for example, United Youth. It's been tapping into the expertise that's already out there in the community.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, I'm afraid time has beaten us, but thank you very much indeed to Michael and Peter and Donna and Lindsay. Thank you. Folks, is there any other business? If not, then our next meeting is Wednesday the 20th at 2 p.m. here in room 30. Meeting adjourned.
Is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee room 30.